So without further ado, I'd like to pass on to Jodie, who is the Associate Director at Technology Digital Transformation at Robert Walters. Definitely skip over to your We're good to go.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, thank you for having me. I'll also just very quickly like to introduce my colleague Clint, who's at the back here as well. We get two for the price of one, shall we say. Again, it's been clear that Strider's invited us to hopefully give you some worthwhile information on the market, the technology market generally, and to some of the new trends and what's happening in 2021. And we're very hopeful it's going to be a very good year, so the signs are looking good at this point. So very quickly, some information on the market, some key projects that are out there and have been out there over the last few years. Key skills in demand, and that's broadly across the tech market as well. Expectations for 2021, and as we said, they're quite high at the moment if we keep that pesky virus out. And then some general, so changing focus a little bit, maybe looking at the hiring process, regional advice and interview tips, even if you are interested in having a chat with us later and getting some further detail on that. So we'll run through and start. So probably just as by way of introduction, I've been with the business over 16 years on Valentine's Day, so really been a love affair of myself. But we've seen a lot of movement over that time period, and the technology market changed substantially even in that time that I've been there. And you really have seen the acceleration of some of the technical trends over the last, say, 2 or 3 years. So on the left-hand side here, this is our data. This is not Seek data. So what we do each month, we have someone that just goes through the job boards and looks at the roles that are coming through. And it's only advertised positions. It's not necessarily roles that we or other agency gets that are not advertised. So what you get from that is some trends. So you can see there over the last few years, you can see that incremental growth. And even last year in 2020, obviously when COVID hit in March, I think it was late March, we definitely saw a decline in the opportunities, so that the permanent market was hit substantially come April, May, June. So what happened there, you could basically see, I'm sure many of you with your own employers probably saw what happened. People just went to mobilise from home. They wanted to make sure the systems were set up, they had capacity to work, making sure people's mental health was okay as well. So we definitely saw a decline through that. Then as we moved forward into, say, July, budgets started getting signed off, the market started moving again, and there was more, roles coming through in particular areas. And then even as we moved through into the latter quarter, so October, November, December, the confidence in WA specifically really started increasing. There was no community transmission, and they actually started getting more budgets signed off and newer projects coming through. And that's when we start to see a big uptick in the BA roles, the project roles, the data roles broadly. And I use that term to cover a lot of roles and job titles within that. So it really started ending on a positive note. And I often say to my team, December's always our busiest month of the year, and it proved true. So we knew that coming into this year, again, if the virus, and we always keep the terminology now pre-COVID, post-COVID, but bear with me, that coming into this year we'd see some big momentum, and it really has started kicking off. So January this year, there's been more jobs advertised than there has been in the last 2 years in January. So it's actually really starting to drive, and that's going to feed into some trends that we should see carrying through for the rest of the year. So over the last, these projects that I've listed on the right-hand side here, this is across industry sectors, and it's probably been some of the technical trends over the last few years. So we work across mining, government, not-for-profit, financial services, education, software providers, ICT vendors, and a real mixture, and organisations, and that's from enterprise level down to small startups. So across industry, I know it's a buzzword, you've probably seen digital transformations of all varieties and shapes and sizes come through, but with that, it's been a lot of technical changes coming through and new skills coming. So to use Water Corp as an example, I don't know if anyone here is from the Water Corporation, but they've gone through ERP projects, they're looking at their data platform, they're looking at cyber security, they're looking at general applications, the customer experience, networking, and everything wrapped up around that. And if you think about a smaller organisation, maybe not quite the size and scale of Water Corp, they're also looking at some initiatives on a smaller scale. There's been platform upgrades and cloud migrations, and what tends to happen when a new technology starts to initiate in the market, it takes a few years before it sometimes kicks off at a great pace in WA, and it's probably been in the last 12 months that we've really started to see a lot more movement towards cloud technologies. probably what's of interest to many in this room here, we've seen a lot more projects focused around data, the analytics, and even feeding into machine learning. And that's across industry sector, which I'll come to shortly. Modern workplace rollouts has really started to drive over the last couple of years, and it's probably been expedited based off last year with COVID. Our organisation ourselves started rolling out, unified comms, team meetings, Zoom meetings, everything wrapped around that, and allowed us to have far more mobility. So with that, and off the back of that, you start to see more increase in cybersecurity projects. Mobile apps, which is Clint's space, a lot more organisations are looking at new initiatives around this, and that's in-house, that's vendor land. So you can start to see there's been some really interesting projects coming through the market. This gives you an indication. So last year, so keep in mind COVID hit, as I said, it was March, and I don't know all of your roles necessarily or the organisations that you work for, but I was a little bit surprised. I was with the organisation back in 2008 with the GFC here, and there was a very high level of redundancies that actually occurred. There were certainly redundancies in the WA tech market, but probably not in tech to the level that we initially expected. And I think that's once people actually mobilised their staff to work from home and the fear started stabilising a bit, they could actually start keeping the projects delivered. They could see that flexibility and working arrangements were working, and so they could keep things ticking over until the budget started coming through. So this is again an internal assessment by us of the roles that were advertised last year. So if you keep in mind that one of the first roles to generally go, I should say, when a downturn happens in the market, are management roles, leadership roles, even project management, that might give you an indication why some of those role titles are a little less. And the support functions down here with help desk support, systems, and even networking was certainly in high demand and development. They just kept ticking over. And as we move through, so some roles that are, I'm not saying they're becoming obsolete, but they're certainly easing in terms of their demand, such as DBA, testing even, just by the nature of the development cycle and what's happening there, those roles are changing. As we move towards the end of the year, as I said earlier, the data and the BA roles really started picking up, but in that part of the year, there wasn't as many, and again, that's an investment, so they weren't initially releasing that funding cycle. So you'll get some trends as we go through. But that's just a nice overview and indication of the market broadly, and we really are expecting the development space will always kick in, and that is across industry sector. There's enterprise projects at your Bankwest, RAC, Water Corporation, the miners, Rio, BHP, you name it, feeding down into the smaller startups, and our team do a lot of work in that software vendor space, and there's some really interesting companies starting up with some good products. The support function combined with help desk and systems is starting to move, and that systems in particular is really looking at the cloud technology and the data space. And again, I use that term, a lot of role titles within that, so hopefully I'm not getting you by saying that. And although that might seem a small percentage, again towards the end of the year we really start looking at some movement coming through there, and again we're seeing that now. So that's really going to be driven through the course of this year. Moving down a little bit more into, again, the data market broadly, these are titles that we've seen advertised over the last couple of years. And if you think of an organisation, and I think I'll just quickly switch to the next slide. We've given you an indication here of some of the industry sectors where we've seen more of these roles. If you just keep in mind now the finance sector, resource, and professional services, I'll just come back to this one now. So if you think of an RAC or a HBF as an example, they've done a lot of work around the customer experience, member policies, so whether it be home insurance, what data they're collecting off the back of that, and how they can use that information for profitability, revenue growth, cost reduction, everything, and then starting to feed into machine learning and models that can put in place there to put the data. Equally, the resources sector is a little bit different. They're starting to look at the assets up on the mine site, the data that feeds off the control systems, how they can use it for fleet maintenance cycles, asset protection, and the professional services organisations. So once you start looking at the finance organisations, the resources, and the not-for-profit from a health perspective, they've really started to bolster those technologies and the projects, and that's now feeding down into other industry sectors. It is the type of roles. So once you start looking at a consulting organisation, they realise that there's a demand for an internal organisation, say the practice or cybersecurity. you start seeing more of these roles come through as vendors. And just throwing some names out there, Big Four, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, Insight, Norada, Modus, they've all bolstered those practices to help deliver services. Then it becomes a combination of in-house capability and then using vendors to deliver those services. So you get a sense that if you start thinking of, again, I'll use RAC as an example if I may, they're a good client as are BHP, that once they start bolstering their internal capability, it starts actually moving to board level. So the board gets more impetus so they can start looking at what's going to drive revenue growth, what's going to look at a cost reduction for the business. Customer experience is obviously a very, very important factor when you start looking at data and how they can use that. So then some of these roles started to come to the forefront over the last couple of years. With organisations that are big enough, so if you think about a Bankwest, an RAC, a water corporation, again maybe a Western Power, historically when I started they didn't have a standalone data practice. They've now set up a team individually, building that practice around that, bringing the skills in, and it might be all of these roles combined, it might be a handful of them. So they've recognised the importance of it. They've now obviously got to make sure that they're using the data properly, they're storing it, they're managing it, farming it as you will to get the most advantage from it. And I think as we move through into the next couple of years, we're going to see more and more of these roles start to come to the fore. Different organisations are going to start to use the technology, and they're going to look at how they can enhance those business operations. So that's probably the last 2 years. We didn't go back in too much detail beyond that. I hope it gives you a bit of overview. And then again, if we start looking at the industry sectors, the prof services covers software houses, it covers ICT vendors, it covers the advisory practices, and again they all started to bolster that. And then feeding into the resources, as I said, the government is still doing a fair bit of work in that, and that could be state government. And I think Sean mentioned a couple of the healthy not-for-profits there, Telephone Institute as an example. So we are seeing more movement there. In the not-for-profit space, we did actually see probably more movement than what's outlined here. Is anyone familiar with the NDIS, or the Consumer Directed Care scheme that occurred over the last couple of years? It's a change in the funding model in that sector. So instead of the funding going straight to the organisations and then feeding the care through to the clients, it became consumer driven. So if one of your family members needed, say, particular care from Silver Chain, they could then go out to market. So those organisations then started looking at the customer base, the data, who was using what, and how they could connect that customer better, and then what type of services they could offer. And they also started looking at things like fleet optimisation. So a Silver Chain van, and how do they take that out to the patients? What's the best route? What's the most efficient route? So you again start to see how they fed that through their organisation and the type of roles that they were hiring. Some project examples. So if you think about, we've done a fair bit of work probably in the last 12 months with particularly data scientists, and I wasn't sure if I was mentioned to Sarada and Sean when I met with them recently. I've just done an assignment for an organisation, but the actual project was under an NDA, so they couldn't tell me what the project was. All I know it was around threat detection and insider threat detection. So we've gone through and looked at some of the data scientists, machine learning specialists that we've been working with, and just looked at some of the projects that they were working on in the industry sector. And a number of them, as I mentioned, if you think about any member-based organisation such as an RAC or HBF again, a lot of it is to do with the customer experience, so what that means. Are they retaining the customers? Are they optimising, their policies? Are they connecting with them enough? Do they have family members that are using particular policies? So how can they keep that attraction there? And if you think of a highly competitive industry like insurance, it's coming to the fore a hell of a lot more. A couple of the top ones there are financial services organisations, so looking at calculation of expected credit loss on loan books, putting algorithms and machine learning models in place, commodity price forecasting, looking at the trading of commodities on the international market, feeding down to some of the mining organisations I mentioned, creation of failures in the railway networks. Can they look at the data that feeds off the control systems? Not a mining expert, the excavators, the diggers, the trains, etc. And then the maintenance on the mine assets. If you think about a mine and the cost of running the mine itself, if they can actually look at the churn rate on the assets and predict failures and predict maintenance cycles, they can actually reduce the cost exponentially. So BHP, Rio and Fortescue have all very heavily bolstered their internal practices. Threat protection, as I said, I think feeding into this year, maybe the next year, we're going to see a lot more movement in this related to cybersecurity, email, threat detection generally.
Oh, no.
We'll give it about 2 seconds. There we go.
Oh, that's really sensitive. Excellent. I'll just stand back and not touch it. How's that? And broad, I think from a lighter scale, a lot of the organisations, if you think about even some of the corporate systems and financial systems, HR, data that they're getting, they're using it for more visualisation purposes. So there's a real mixture of projects that are actually starting to coming through. And again, I think coming into this year, as organisations, because it is an expense to run, set the infrastructure up, set the network up, start looking at the machine learning models and start driving that and looking at the data that they need. But I do think it's actually moving more and more towards board level now, and if organisations can understand, the benefits, then they're actually going to see more projects initiated throughout the next couple of years, which is a good sign for some of you. I did a quick assessment just to give a bit of a national trends through, and I spoke to my colleagues in Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney in particular. Brisbane and Western Australia have quite similar markets in regards to the energy, the mining, not so much the retail sector here, but the energy mining sector. Melbourne and Sydney are a little bit different. They're heavily focused on the financial services, telco and retail. But it just might give you a sense of some of the types of roles that we're seeing and some of the technology stack that's coming through, particularly Melbourne and Sydney around the financial services and telco, very heavy on the customer service experience. Retail obviously feeding in, and it could be in-store, it could be online, and looking at patrons' usage of buying habits, spending habits, etc., and obviously navigating through tools such as Google. But we are seeing more movement in that space. Brisbane again is very similar to Western Australia, and we're seeing a mixture coming through now from the data engineering side, more data scientist positions coming through, and that's across the industry sector. We will include the link for you at the end to our global salary survey. So if anyone does have any indications of moving and wants more information on the eastern states, do let us know. This is a very quick review of LinkedIn, just to give you a bit of sense of what's happening. Now, this is me plugging titles in. I'm sure many of you know how LinkedIn works. I just went and looked for titles with data analyst, or any title beginning with data, machine learning, artificial, titles around that. But what it doesn't cover is AI, BI, and the smaller titles. So there's probably more professionals on LinkedIn with the applicable titles. But I just included the gender split there because across the market, this is a big topical point with many industry sectors and companies looking at the diversity. And it's not just gender-based, it's also looking at backgrounds and skill sets that they can bring in. Very well known that a diverse team is a collaborative team. You can actually get more results from it. But we are seeing a higher female percentage in this area of the market. And to give you an example, something like networking or systems administration in general is under 15% representation by female. But you mentioned She Codes. We are also a sponsor of She Codes and actively involved with the group, and that's also bringing some new talent into the market, which is great. And I just thought I'd give you a sense of some of the type of companies that are hiring, and that feeds back to some of the information that we've seen on the industry sectors, particularly focused on mining, resources and utilities. There is some information there just around Curtin and some of the other organisations that were in the next, say, top 10 or top 20. Think people like the RAC, HBF, some of the other miners, Horizon, I think, were on there as well. So again, a bit of a focus around a couple of those core industry sectors, but we're certainly expecting more movement outside that, which is great. This is just to give you an indication of, Gartner is obviously very reputable within the industry, and they release at the beginning of each year their trends for the coming year. So just thought I'd put that in there so you can see that there is expectation across industry and globally for there to be a big movement in a couple of key areas. Data, AI, machine learning and cyber, a couple of the big topical points. And that's not going to go away. Even pre-COVID, we were expecting far more movement in this area of the market, probably than initially came through. But again, we're seeing some very, very positive movement across all industry sectors. And I think once organisations realise, the scale of the benefits that they can get from it and the funding that will come, obviously, the next couple of years, then we'll see more movement through this. And again, I can pass this on to Sarada so you can have a look at some of these trends. But we are starting to see that coming through. We're talking about the internet behaviours, and we're seeing a lot of work coming through now in that data science space related to cybersecurity, insider threat detection, phishing emails and the like. So it'll be interesting to see what comes off the back of that as well. I'm not sure how many of you are hiring managers, but I just thought I'd include just a little bit of information on this. What's probably going to work out for this year, again, if we can keep COVID out of the market and the state, that it is moving into a candidate-driven market. So it's put the candidate in the driving seat, but in a positive way, because we're already looking at more opportunities coming through the market than this time in the last couple of years, and managers need to be aware of that. So I think it's important for anyone that's a job seeker, they've got to realise their worth in that hiring process and what they want as well, and then what they can get from it. But equally, a manager needs to be aware of where the market is, what's moving, what's happening, what's out there, so they can also promote their company in the best light and attract the right people. So if any of you are hiring managers or work with people that are in a hiring capacity, you definitely need a streamlined recruitment process this year. So know what the role is, what you're looking to hire, the technical skills, the cultural skills, the behavioural aspects. What's the career path for the individual? People do want to know that. Where's the role going? What will they get exposure to in regards to technology, the people that they're working with, and learning and development opportunities? If it's a contract, if it's a permanent, get the rate or the salary right. This market is moving, and there's some newer trends and newer skills coming through the market, so they've got to gauge it accordingly. Don't get into bidding wars, but maybe even if it's a contract, they might want to think about things as completion bonus and making sure they retain the talent for the right duration. And again, from my experience dealing with particularly people in this area of the market, they want to know some interesting work and what's out there and how they can add value to those organisations as well. Flexible working arrangements has been a massive topping point last year. I'm sure you've all been exposed to it with your organisations, and it's only going to keep being a topical point because there's a lot of people out there that want flexibility in reduced hours or being able to work from home 1 or 2 days a week, whatever that might look like. And I think I just put this one down here with the different ways of working that we're seeing now, with more flexibility, working with people through Teams and Zooms and different ways and channels of communicating. That engagement and being able to engage with people at different levels through different mediums is also going to come to the fore. And we're starting to see people ask for that now in regards to the engagement skills and the capabilities that they've got there. Right. So I'm going to hand over to Clint, and Clint is going to take you through probably the latter stages of that. So, Rada, do we have questions now or at the end? At the end?
I think maybe more at the end.
At the end? Okay. No problem. I'll just quickly run through this one, Clint. So I'm not sure how many of you are looking or will be looking in the future, but that's what we're here for, to give you tips if you would like. And just if you are looking, think about that recruitment life cycle. It doesn't necessarily start from when you walk in for an interview or when you actually send your CV for an opportunity. If you are interested in being able to be connected and have someone contact you, whether it be a recruitment consultant or a hiring manager or even a friend, look at your profile, look at the way you're connecting with the market, and a LinkedIn profile, even other social media platforms. Think about what information you've got on those, and titles, pictures, achievements, etc., so people can find you quicker. Start getting active, talk to people such as us, finding what's happening out in the market, talking to your peers around you, because they're the eyes and ears to the projects. They're the ones that know what's happening in their organisations, and may be able to introduce you to some professionals that are out there. Start connecting, reach out, make a connection. If you like the look of a company and you want to get involved, reach out to someone there. If I had a recruiter that was working somewhere and they approached me and said, hey, can we have a chat? I would gladly take them out for a coffee and have a conversation with them. And start preparing, think about who you want to work for, what projects you want to get involved with, what type of people you also want to be involved with. I think that's equally important, so you can collaborate with the people, like-minded people, and then we'll start working through that interview process, and hopefully you'll end up in the future with the job that you're looking for if you don't already have it. So I'll hand over to Clint quickly now, and he can run through some of this stuff with you.
Thank you very much, Jodie. Good evening, everybody. I guess just a very quick introduction to myself. So I manage the tech and transformation team. So I work underneath Jodie and Jodie's team, but we more so specialise or have an area of focus in the development and testing space. So anything sort of software and applications. What we're seeing in terms of sort of market trends is interesting enough how, I'll move slightly over so you can get me there, is that better? I guess in terms of there's a lot of roles that are kind of mixing together now, so we're not seeing traditional developers anymore, or front end or back end. We're seeing full stack developers, we're seeing developers who are now doing testers, we're seeing developers who are getting involved in AI and getting involved in sort of machine learning. And I think the moral of the story is moving forward as technologists will be the way forward. So what I would suggest is if you can get your hands on anything new or new technologies or join groups like this and sort of broaden your horizons and understand something different and just be really inquisitive, that will better prepare you for sort of any future opportunity in that space. Just kind of going back to small things like branding, market presence, and whether that's on LinkedIn, Seek, or networking events. If you do decide and you are open to opportunities, and some interesting statistics which we can go through a little bit later based on our salary guides, and we interview a lot of people to gather this information, so it's pretty accurate. But 80% of people would be open to an opportunity this year, just in general, and to get yourself noticed, because not everyone is going to be sort of actively on Seek or actively looking for an opportunity on LinkedIn, but I'm sure you've all had it before where the best opportunities come along when you least expect it. Someone taps you on the shoulder, or you hear about something, or that you attend a networking event and someone says, hey, you've got some great skill sets, what about this? And this is what this comes down to. So your LinkedIn, look at it in terms of sort of marketing yourself. So make sure you've got your experiences updated on LinkedIn. Make sure it's some clear content, good suitable pictures. It just displays you and who you are. In terms of technologies, certification activity levels, all this type of stuff is key because you want to get noticed. If you're going to be looking for work, people need to be able to find you. A really key important part of that, and I think in Perth more so than many other places, is some of our role titles, especially if you join big mining companies or something like that, get all sorts of different spins put on them, which makes it hard for, say, someone like a recruiter or someone who wants to engage with, or a hiring manager or an intern or what have you, to find you if your job title is something which is really obscure. So just think about things like that when you're putting your information on LinkedIn, just to make it, I guess if you want to be found, you want us to be able to find you, so make it easy. Don't make it too hard for us, please. In terms of your Seek profile, make sure it's up to date. Make sure you've got update CVs on there. The amount of candidates we speak to who, the first step is updating their CV, and then they're unsure about the detail and the content. We'll just put it down. We can help you and sort of guide you with that. But get that information on paper. Look, if your CV is 9 pages long, and look, maybe sometimes that can be the case, but we can help you kind of streamline that down. But we'd rather know all the sort of information and all your experience, we'd rather know that so we can help you then display it best to the client in that sense. But definitely make sure.
Quick one for you then.
Sorry.
Making a CV there. What's current guidelines for that? Because that changes, and I've had a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I moved here to WRS. A lot of people have these really long CVs.
Yeah.
You need to have everything in it in lots of detail. But when I've been a hiring manager, I've hated that.
Yeah, true.
So what's your kind of guidance there at the moment and the market?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the role and depends on the level of the role that you're looking at. But look, anything sort of 3-4 pages is completely acceptable. Anything above that, do you need that amount of information? And just to sort of jump onto that point, what we've seen through COVID is, and Jodie touched on it before, there's a few different areas and a few different ways which we're being able to engage with candidates and clients and present your information. So we're using things like Spark Hire, which essentially is a platform that creates a 3-minute video answering a couple of questions, and we would then embed that in your CV. So where you may have had a CV 8-9 pages long, some of that information you can include in a 3-minute video. you know. So I think the most important thing is to make sure you address the role in itself and what that opportunity presents, and make sure you address that with your experience in your CV. We'll show you just in the next slide in terms of how we would how hiring managers find it. You know, being a hiring manager yourself, what they like to see, and it's not, you know, a load of information. They want sort of clear bullet points. They want your qualifications, and the easier you make it, the better. Is probably all I can say there. But 4 or 5 pages max. Nah, nothing bigger. So in terms of your Seek profile, just make sure, kind of similar to LinkedIn, everything's up to date. There's loads of information on there. Easy place to find you as well. There's a few, I think, products in terms of what we use as well to help us find really hard to find candidates in terms of Google AdWords and things like that, and that all uses your sort of key technologies and your key experience to help sort of find you. So make sure you've got it on there. It will just help us. It will help highlight your profile to the right people. Again, attending networking events, getting out there and meeting people will definitely help, especially in WA. Everyone's, you know, very multicultural in this room, and you know, I spent a lot of time in the UK and sort of came back, but WA is definitely a place where it's not what you know, it's who you know at times. And I think a few people were smiling there, so they've seen that before, but it's definitely something which, getting out to networking events, finding people who are interested in similar things to yourself and speaking to them, you'll probably find that you get a lot of buy-in through those sort of aspects. In terms of resume preparation, and this is something that, you know, if you do decide to engage with a recruitment company, they can certainly help you with. But I guess the biggest point is make it very positive. The layout and the format, you can see that's very clear, concise. It's not hard to read. Really important personal details, education. You know, let us see that. License and qualifications and certificates. And if you're sort of underway in doing certificates, tell us about them. We want to know them. Employment history is obviously what generally everyone screens to. If you're a hiring manager in the room, how long, on average, I may just pick on you, sorry, but in terms of if you got a CV and how long are you going to look at it, you know, initially?
Very little time.
Yeah. You could, you know, look, I hate to say this, 10, 20 seconds, 30 seconds max, because you're going to scan through, you're going to see if there's anything that interests you here, then you're going to screen down to here. So make sure that you've got your employment history, make sure your employment history is bullet pointed and the information you're using is clear. If you're listing technologies, if you're listing you know, certifications and stuff like that, which is really of interest and fantastic in the tech world, just mention it, how you're using that technology, what the project is, what you've done in terms of detail on that project using that technology will help any hiring manager make a decision very quickly based on your CV and hopefully get in front of them. In terms of interview tips, I think everyone's different, but I think what we want to know now and what hiring managers want to know and organisations want to know is they're hiring a person. You know, they're not just hiring you to do, you know, one job or one project, or they're not just hiring you for your technical skills, they're hiring for who you are. So make sure like some of these other the other aspects of you come out during an interview. So, you know, you've done your CV, you've got all the information right, you've gone to meet the client. Don't just talk about your experience, you know, let them know who you are, let them know if you know what you're enthusiastic about, let them know, you know, what in terms of commonality and common ground. Like sometimes you start talking about sort of volunteering and you know, your interests and your professionalism and all these types of things, and it relates to them. You know, they wanted to meet you for a reason, so when you go, just be confident, really give them a piece of yourself and tell them who you are, not just what your CV says. If that makes sense. You know, in terms of professional achievements and sort of, you know, academic achievements and what have you, we also want to know about that, you know, vacation work, volunteer work. Tell them who you are and who you represent, because at the end of the day, they're hiring you as a person, not just you to do a job. You know, generally people hire someone they have some kind of common ground with, or something they can feel that connection with. And look, you know, we've all, if you haven't hired people before, or if you have, you generally hire someone who you know you can trust, and these types of things help to show that, help to sort of gauge that, and gives you that personality, helps your personality come out. Going back to our sort of salary survey and our global salary survey, and we share this with candidates and clients, and we can certainly share the link to this with Cyril and Sean afterwards as well, so you can sort of gauge and whether you're looking, potentially to see if you're paid correctly. We all have a look at that, or if you're seeing, if you are going to be hiring someone, you want to sort of just benchmark and see where they're at. I've got a couple of handouts here that you can come and have a look at as well. But way we gather this information is we take a survey across candidates we place, hiring managers we're dealing with, candidates we haven't placed who are just involved in a process. We look at their sort of current salary, what it was last year, what it was this year, and we've got a long history of doing this to give us a really accurate, assumption in terms of the market, based on industry, whether you're working for a not-for-profit or you're working for a mining company, and we generally know mining companies pay a little bit more than a not-for-profit, but anyway, that's a completely different story. I guess just look at this as a wide range. Some of the ranges we see, it could be on a permanent basis, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 difference, and that just depends on industry, company, role type. So based on contract, based on perm, we'll give you a good idea of what your salary might be, what you'd like it to be, what it could be, which will give you a bit of an idea. Then if you are going to start looking, you kind of know where to market yourself, and based on years of experience, based on technology you're using, based on project experience and so on.
Go back.
That's all good. Look, we're here all night, so just come and talk to us. Look, if you are potentially interested to hear more about some information in that sort of machine learning, data science space, maybe speak to Jodie. I'll try and help, but maybe from a more of a recruitment or a development background, and give you kind of an overview. But look, please do come and talk to us. Ask us questions. No question is not wants to be asked. We want to encourage you to do that. There's it's interesting when you get into the world that we live in, and the amount of people we speak to is there is some real common mistakes that people can make when they go to do a job search. So please do come and speak to us and ask us about that. If you're from a hiring manager background, please also come and have a chat to us, and if we can help you on your way with that, then fantastic. But if there's any questions, come and see us. Did you want do some questions now at all, or?
Yeah,
Is there any
some questions now?
Yeah?
I have a question. So in the slide for roles by industry, increase a little bit of certain categories there.
That one?
This one.
Yeah.
So how do you find the market of professional services and utilities? So what this category contains?
Okay.
So,
So in here, I went through and looked at the roles that were advertised, and again, it doesn't necessarily include roles because we don't advertise every role that we get. But if I looked at that say portfolio of roles, it probably aligns to the roles equally there against this slide. So what we did, I went through and looked at the type of roles here that were advertised over the last 2 years, and then looked at those roles specifically and which industry sectors they fell into. So if I come across here, so that prior slide, then you'd be looking at, say, the financial services. So it might be an RAC, it might be HBF, a Bankwest. The professional services is quite broad, and that could cover, say, your big four in terms of your advisory firms like an EY, a KPMG, Deloitte. It will also cover some of the larger professional services firms and consulting firms like Modus or DXC, maybe slightly smaller in terms of your Insight and Valrada. And then you have some, say, specific software companies built into that as well. So that's a term we use to cover those type of organisations as they deliver services into a client base. And government is a mixture between state government and local government, so anything with Department of or City of, etc. And not-for-profit will cover any organisation, and that's predominantly around. You could argue very well that RAC is not-for-profit, but you're looking at things like the Telephone Institute and Silver Chain and that aged care providers, already, you know, care services in that sector. That's where we've seen a lot of that movement. And as I mentioned earlier, that's based on some of the stuff related to the NDIS and the consumer directed care. Not in its entirety, but that's one of the major drivers. Oh, utilities, so a Water Corp, a Western Power, a Synergy, a Horizon, some of the major providers that will deliver, I'll say home services, that's not the right word to use, you know, electricity, water, and services such as that.
One more question. Okay, we have 11 people.
Really?
Okay. So this question is more out of curiosity, I guess. So we are in a machine learning group. So my question is, if Robert Wartes use any sort of data analytic software, or maybe using keywords matching or anything like that. I heard that it's becoming very common for some recruiting companies to use some sort of software for screening the CVs or resume before, you know, analyzing. I just wonder if you guys do that as a practice.
Well, that's a
is there
big,
any
we use Power BI for our reporting capabilities. I can tell you that, and there's far too much information that comes through.
Yeah.
So our internal system that we have is Profile. It's a Microdeck product. We don't yet use software for that. That is a big topical point in the recruitment industry. So we can do it ourselves. So if, let's just say, we had someone come in and they were a business analyst and we'd code them up with particular skills and the title, it means we have to then go and plug the information in to extract it. So it's not quite what you're talking about there. We don't have a tool such as that. It is a topical point in the recruitment industry, and one of the big things that they're talking about at the moment is some of the faults and the gaps with that. And you know, you might have, where was I reading it? It was an article someone had done in the US, and they were looking at the data that was coming off the back of that, and it was related to the data that was coming up and what's the word I'm looking for? The inaccuracies with that. So it might, as an example, say if you had a number of females that played softball in the US, then they make an assumption that anyone there was a female candidate. As a very, very, very simple example. I'm probably not explaining that as well as the man on the YouTube video did, but that's the simple concept around that. So the arguments that we're seeing in the recruitment industry, it's there and it does happen, but it also takes away the personal element around someone's beliefs, their background, their personality, which is a large part of that recruitment process, as Clint said. So it's not just the technical skills and the competencies and where someone worked. The human element hasn't yet found its way through that mechanism.
I suppose the question when anyone who's looking for a job is there's that fear factor, isn't there? If you don't even get your foot in the door to get to the showing your personality, your capabilities, because you haven't got through that automated filtering process that gets you there.
Yeah.
Is that fear really that valid, or is that really, it's not really there yet?
If someone's using that, then you could argue that it is valid. And I think, you know, even Clint mentioned it. I mean, we're consultants, we know we're busy, and when people send us resumes, it's much easier like this. So if I can walk up to someone, have a conversation, engage and get to know them as a person, you see the person first. You don't always see that when you see the resume. So it is part of that process, and you need to have a well-constructed resume that is going to pique someone's interest. And then once we get on the phone to them, you know, or a hiring manager or a team member, you can actually then start asking questions and get to know them. So the resume is an important part of the process, and we always try and educate our staff is don't be too flippant, because, you know, we know some other the companies here, like, we could argue that Bankwest has had a great development team over, you're not from Bankwest, sorry? No? Okay, good. We could argue, you know, that they've had a great team over the years and they've got a certain style of person coming through, or, you know, company A has done A, B and C and company B has done this. So you can get to know the companies and the type of environments that they've had, but you still want to then know the person. So a well-written resume and the information that's on there that piques people's interest is still critical in the way that we work at the moment.
I think just on that as well, like what we do see and we hear quite a lot is, and to provide an example, we've got our job on, we're working with a hiring manager, we go in then to source some fantastic candidates to present, a candidate we think would be fantastic for the role, we find out they've applied directly, but they haven't been interviewed or they've been screened out for one reason, which I think was the point you've been getting there. Now, a lot of that's done by HR, not sort of any automated services. So it's generally done by HR, because if you think there is always a bit of a disconnect at times, and it's not just with HR, it's from our perspective as well. If we don't take a really detailed job description, the hiring manager isn't fully comfortable or fully aware of what they want, because some people do change their mind halfway through a process, which you probably all encountered as well. But it's that sort of, it's more so that disconnect, so it's almost like a human error. So with resumes getting screened out, look, it does happen. It happens. People do that. We would possibly miss something on a CV, and you may be the perfect candidate for that job. So what we're saying, like Jodie was saying there, in terms of that, having that information on your CV is really important. If you're applying for a job, and a lot of people do this, they have one CV and they just apply, 10, 15 jobs, depending on how interested you are in that organisation, or, look, if you got made redundant and you really need a job, you may be less selective in terms of your applications, and that's completely fine. But what I would always encourage people to do is really read the job advertisement, and sometimes that can list everything under the sun. We see it all the time, and that's not really the core qualities, but have a really good read and make sure that your CV kind of addresses the requirements in that sense. Because if it does, you will probably find you'll get past that first screen, whether it be automated, whether it be from HR, whether it be a recruiter, and you'll get hopefully a phone call. Because a phone call or a setting up a meeting is what you're after. You want to get in front of that person. But I think, like Jodie said, that hopefully solving that problem is having a really well written CV and just customizing it to that specific role.
Awesome.
Cool.
So, folks, if we could give a big hand for Clint and Jodie.